Hello, hello! Welcome to another episode of History in the Dark. I am your host, Darkness the Curse. And before we begin, as always, thank you so much to my generous patrons, my British Rail critics, and of course, my underwater train finders, Thomas Ward, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Some Dude 267, Longsight, Joshua Long, Ohio Trucker 1, and Royal Hudson 2860. You are the reason why this content remains more than meets the eye. And yes, today we have another top 5 list, and this time I decided to get creative again and come up with something a little weird. And today we're going to talk about trains that are in disguise. Stealth locomotives, if you will. Because you look at them and you assume what they are, and you couldn't be more wrong. This is 5 trains that are not what they seem. So in order to do this in a proper way, I decided not to announce what these locomotives are at first. I want to give you guys some time to guess. And this one is, well, I mean, it's probably a diesel. I think that's a fair assessment. And it's an EMD, maybe? It's got that bulldog nose going on. It doesn't quite look like E-Series or F-Series. Maybe it's one of those weird Alco ones? Or Baldwin? Even GM? No? Let's get a better look at it. Oh, it's got a 2-ended cab. That means it's probably not American. And I get this question sometimes, where people ask me, why don't American locomotives do the double-ended cab thing generally? Now, we do it sometimes, but you're right, a lot of our locomotives don't, and I think that's mostly down to hood units. Hood units are really popular for us, and there's no reason to have 2 cabs on a hood unit. You can see well in both directions, and if anything, it's more efficient because that means the driver doesn't have to get out and move. As far as our passenger service goes, our lines don't run frequently enough for it to really be a necessary thing for us. If a train has to go in reverse, there's usually a control car at the other end anyway. Anyway, back to this thing. Well, what is it then? Well, we're right when we say it's not American. It's actually British. Oh no. No. Again! Ugh, I mean, I guess I can't complain. You showing up first is like ripping off a Band-Aid. Just get it over with. Yes, this is British Railways DP1, commonly known as Deltic. Now wait a minute, you say. Excuse me, but the Class 55 is the Deltic, isn't it? Well, yes, but the DP1 was the prototype for the Class 55s. And as you can tell, it had a little bit of a different look to it that wouldn't make it immediately obvious it was even related to them. It was constructed by English Electric in 1955 as a technology demonstrator for the namesake of the Deltic lines. When I discussed the Class 55 before, I had said they got their names from their prototype, and that's technically true, but the prototype was called Deltic because of the engine. The Napier Deltic engine was a British design. The name Deltic is derived from Delta, and has to do with their unique layout, where the cylinders are in a 3-bank triangle and have a crankshaft at each corner of that triangle. The Deltic engines are known to be very powerful, and they were. And just like the Class 55, the DP1 also used 2 of them. The DP1 was utilized for testing and some service until 1960, when it suffered a severe oil leak in one of the engines. It was sent back to English Electric for repair, but this was actually never done, and the locomotive was withdrawn from service in March of 1961. Originally they wanted to test it in Canada, but this fell through, and it was eventually donated in April of 1963 to the Science Museum in South Kensington. It stayed there for about 30 years, and then it was transferred to the National Railway Museum in York. 11 years after that, it was moved to the National Railway Museum Shildon, and it remains there as of May 2020. The DP1 also is not in running condition, as the Deltic engines installed inside of it would be too expensive to fix at this point. Though there's still the Napier Deltic engines, they differ slightly from the ones they used in Class 55. The original oil leak is never actually fixed, and major components from the engines was actually removed for spare parts for the Royal Navy prior to the DP1 being donated to the Science Museum in the first place. The locomotive was never technically owned by British Railways, so this was allowed. As a result, it's unlikely DP1 will ever actually power up again, at least not with the original engines intact. But it's still a nice piece of history, and it paved the way for the outstanding Class 55s. That is clearly just a box with wheels on it. What is that? Well, this is kind of another softball choice based off of the fact that I'm sure plenty of you are familiar with Thomas the Tank Engine and know exactly what this is. But for those of you who have no clue, let's go off of what we can see here. Buffers, yes. So European design, maybe British. And wooden paneling, maybe? So probably not a diesel. Is it electric?
Push! Hissed Toby.
Oh! Shh! I think we've offended him. Okay, I'll stop playing around. This is Toby! Or rather, Toby's basis. This is a Great Eastern Railway Class C53. And no, it's not electric or diesel. This is a steam tram, an 060T. So it technically counts as a tank engine, but obviously tram locomotives were built differently. A tram engine is a steam locomotive that is specially built to run on a street or a roadside tramway track, and they were meant for very short regional service. Since they had to be smaller and condensed, it meant there wasn't a lot of room for their water tank or their coal bunkers, both of which had to be inside the cab. So they could never go very far, but they were pretty good for what they were meant for. Only 12 were ever produced, and they were built between 1903 and 1921. They lasted a pretty decent amount of time, too. They wound up passing on to... British Railways. Again! You better not be in every spot on this list. I'll be really mad if you are. But BR didn't let them last very long with them, all being withdrawn by 1955. And sadly, not a single one survived into preservation. All of them were scrapped. Oh, come on, that's a pretty easy one. I mean, those are obviously diesels, duh. They got the bulldog nose design. I don't see no buffers or anything weird like that. They're single car bodies, so probably American. Are they EMDs? Alco? Baldwin? They're definitely diesels, right? Right? No. No, they're not. They're steam engines. Technically. What you are looking at are the General Electric steam turbine locomotives. A pair of locomotives that were built by General Electric for Union Pacific in 1938. We've talked about steam turbine locos before when we talked about the S2. And despite how much I love the S2, with how cool it looks, and the fact that it does resemble an actual steam locomotive, the General Electric outings weren't modeled to look like steam locomotives at all. It's true that steam turbines differ in many ways compared to a traditional steam locomotive, but they're still steam, so I kind of prefer the S2's, more familiar look when it comes to steam power. They definitely made these just look like diesels, but they were very ambitious and predate the S2. In some ways, at least for Union Pacific's purposes, they were kind of better, as that whole only efficient at high speed issue wasn't really a factor for them. They displayed excellent acceleration and could actually maintain schedules better than conventional steam locomotives. Their problem was mainly that they were a bit too ambitious. The two locomotives proved very unreliable and very expensive to maintain. They broke down often enough to be annoying, and cost a lot when they were doing it. Eventually, Union Pacific abandoned the project by December 1941. New York Central actually tested them too, though, then gave them right back, and the Great Northern Railway actually used them in 1943 during the World War II power crunch, which was a situation where there was a lack of sufficient locomotives to sustain regular operations. The turbines could move, so Great Northern wanted them. However, they didn't last long even there, and were retired from service later that same year. Neither one was preserved, and they were scrapped before the end of World War II. Okay, what is that? Well, it looks like a steam engine, but it looks like a really complicated and boxy one. I don't know what's going on over here. It's kind of all over the place in the front. I don't even know where to begin. But, it looks like a steam engine, right? Well, you'd be half right. This is an experimental Kitson-Still steam diesel hybrid locomotive. Oh yes! We're into some weird territory now! The Kitson-Still name is derived from the Still engine that actually enjoyed some success in marine and stationary applications. The engine worked by a combination of diesel and steam. It had a double-acting piston. One side was diesel, the other side was steam. The engine was started by steam, and when sufficient speed was reached, diesel fuel was injected into the other side of the engine. The benefit with this was that it allowed direct propulsion without any form of transmission. On top of that, once it was operating under the diesel power, they could actually use the steam part of the engine as a booster if they needed that extra push. Kitson and Company of Leeds thought that this principle might be utilized well for a steam locomotive. It was the 1920s and diesels were still very primitive back then, so they thought a hybrid might make more sense since the steam technology was familiar to their crews and it had already been proven in other applications. Construction was started in 1924 and the engine wound up with a 262T arrangement. It was a tank engine. By the 1930s, it actually ran on the London and North Eastern Railway. And believe it or not, it actually functioned. The problem wasn't so much the locomotive, it was Kitson and Company. They had put a significant amount of money into this project, and it had taken so long for them to figure it out that by the time they were ready to actually make a production version, actual full diesel locomotives were available for service. There was no reason for a hybrid, and was kept in the York North Shed until at least July of 1935, but after that it was returned to Kitson and Company, who scrapped it that same month. What in the... I don't even know where to begin with that. Alright, okay, that's just... Analyze everything that's going on here. This is clearly a rail car. I believe it's what this would be. But... it's got a steam engine, cylinders, and side rods, so it's... Is it a steam rail car? No. No, it is not. This is, technically speaking, a diesel. Yeah, I know, I was surprised too. This is a German-built Diesel-Pneumatic locomotive, which is a bunch of words that I have strung together. With that order given, you have no idea what to do with it, and that's okay. I will explain. This was a weird experiment that started in the 1920s. Apparently a really good time for weird experiments on everybody's rail lines. It was a 464, and the idea was to solve the problem of power transmission between a diesel engine and the wheels. Nowadays, diesel-electric driven locomotives are commonplace, it's normal, but they were still figuring it out then. This thing was completed in 1929. It was called the V3201, and it was considered the first high-performance diesel locomotive on the Deutsche Reichsbahn. It used a massive MAN LO6 VU 45/42 engine, which was originally developed to power U-boats. So what's with the cylinders and the side rods, you ask? After all, it's a diesel. Well, that's the pneumatic part. Like I said, they were trying to figure out how to get a diesel to drive a locomotive effectively, and they thought making it kinda like a steam locomotive would make sense. It didn't technically use steam in the traditional sense. The only reason there was steam involved at all was for some added lubrication in the cylinders. Beyond that, it just used hot air to move the pistons back and forth. It technically worked. It could actually reach a speed of 80 kilometers per hour, which wasn't bad in those days. The problem seems to be down to efficiency. For one thing, pneumatic conversion in this manner loses a lot of heat, making it not very fuel efficient. The cylinders were also prone to overheating in general, and the technology was extremely expensive. It was all abandoned by 1935. Though one nice thing, Markland produced a nice little model of it, so I suppose the V3201 isn't completely forgotten. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.